This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? So state management is something that's pretty difficult to learn when you're learning front-end web development, and there's a lot of different avenues you can take. If you're using React, you can go with Redux or some other state management library. Also, there's the context API, which is fantastic. I actually just released a course, so we built a couple projects with it. In this video, I want to show you another option, and that's Easy Peasy. Now, what this is it's basically a wrapper for Redux so that we don't have to use all the boilerplate that comes with Redux. To me, that's the worst part about Redux is the amount of boilerplate and the amount of code that you have to write, and this makes it easy to use Redux without having to do that. Now, do you have to use this? Am I pushing it? Absolutely not. I'm just showing it to you. If you like what you see, then maybe use it in a project. If not, then stick to what you know. But it's pretty easy to use. We just need to create a store, and that store will have all of our state. It'll also have our actions, and then we can directly manipulate the state from our action. There's no need to have separate reducers or anything like that. Then we simply wrap the application in the provider as we normally would, and to access state and actions, we use these hooks. Okay, so we can easily access our state and actions from any component. Now, I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of starting from absolute scratch like I usually do, I'm going to take this little to-dos application that I have. It doesn't really work. I mean, these to-dos are hard-coded in the component. You'll see if I try to add, it doesn't work. Delete doesn't work. What I want to do is hook up application level state using Easy Peasy into this application. All right, so I have it running now on my local host, and I'll have a link in the description to a Codesandbox that has all the code if you're interested. But basically our app.js, very simple. We just have a to-dos component and an add to-do, and we're embedding them here. If we look at to-dos, I just simply have the to-dos in a variable here, and then I'm just mapping through them here and outputting a to-do item. If we look at the to-do item, passing in the to-do, and I just have a line through it if it's completed, and we have the title outputting, and then a button with a trash can link from Font Awesome. And if we look at the form, it's just a form. It doesn't really do anything. We're using set state for the one field we have, which is a title. All right, and then I just have a little bit of custom CSS here. All right, and that's pretty much it. So now we're going to implement Easy Peasy, and you're going to see how easy peasy it is. So let's go into app.js, and the first thing that we want to do is bring in a couple things. So we want to bring in the store provider, and we want to bring in create store. Okay, and those are going to come from Easy Peasy. And by the way, I already installed it. You just got to do npm install Easy Peasy. You don't have to install Redux or Thunk or anything. That all comes with it as a dependency. Okay, so we're going to import that stuff, and then we need to initialize a store. So I'm going to say const store equals, and let's say create store. Now we could put our stuff right in here, but it'll get really long and messy. So what's recommended is we create a file called model, and we pass that in, which we'll do in a second. All right, and then we just need to wrap our application in our store provider, pass in the store, just like we would with, I guess, standard Redux. Okay, so we want to wrap our entire thing here like that. Okay, now we want to bring in model. I haven't created it just yet, but we'll go ahead and bring it in. Let's do it right here. So that's going to be from ./model. All right, so we're going to get an error because we don't have that model file. So in our source, let's create a file called model.js, and this is where everything is going to go. So let's go ahead and export default, and basically it's just basically an object that has all of our state and all of our actions. We can also use Thunk, which I'll show you later on. So let's just create a state here. We'll have to-dos, which will be an array, and I'm going to grab from my where is it? todos.js. I'm just going to grab these here because we don't want this in here. We want this in our global state. So we'll go ahead and paste those in, and that's it. We'll save it. All right, now to bring those into to our to-dos component, very simple. So I'm going to delete this. And all we have to do is use a hook. So we're going to go import. Actually, let's do this right here. Let's say import, and we want to bring in useStore from easy peasy. And then right in the component here above the return, we're just going to create a variable called todos, set that to useStore, and pass in here state. So we just have an arrow, and then we want state.todos. So whatever part of the state we want to use. All right, and then this is gonna go right here. We're gonna loop through and output the to-do item. So if I save and go back, you'll see that now we're getting it from Redux, and now our Redux dev tools are working. If we look at our state, we have our to-dos. So very, very simple to implement, much easier than Redux from scratch. And I'm not saying don't use Redux from scratch, and definitely use this. It's just an option. All right, so what about actions? Let's say we want to toggle the completed value. So in our model.js, what I'll do is create an action. Now, in order to create an action, I'm going to have to import up here action from easy peasy. All right, and then we can go down here right under the state, the to-do state, so right under our bracket here, and let's just say actions, and we'll put in toggle, set that to action. All right, now this is going to take in an arrow function. It's going to take in the state, and it's going to take in the ID, because we need to know which one we're toggling here. So this is going to be an arrow, and then we can do whatever we want and basically manipulate the state how we want. So I'm going to take my state.todos, which is that array, and I'm going to map through and say for each to do, then check for the correct to do. So if to do.id, if the current ID is equal to the ID that's passed in, then we know that's the one we want to toggle. So we'll say to do dot completed. We want to set that to the opposite, so not to do dot completed. That way, if it's true, it gets set to false. If it's false, it gets set to true. Now, if it doesn't match the ID, we just simply want to return the to do. And that's it. That's our toggle. So I'm going to save that. Now the way that we can implement that in our to-do item, because this is where we want to do it, I basically want to click on the title here and have it toggle. So if we want to use an action, we simply import the use actions hook, and that's going to be from easy peasy. And let's see, we'll go to the span right here. And I'm going to add an on click. Actually, before I do that, we actually need to go right here. Just like we did when we wanted to access the state, we want to create toggle use actions. And instead of state, we pass in actions. And then we just want actions dot remove. Not remove. We're not doing that yet. Toggle. Okay, and then down here in the span, we'll have our on click, and I'm just going to have an arrow, and then I'm going to call the toggle, and remember that takes in an ID, so we want to pass in the to-do.id. All right, and that's it. Let's go ahead and try it. So now if I click one of these, you'll see that the gets the line through. And it also calls action.toggle, and you can see the state diff here. So it's changing it to true, changing it to false, and so on. Okay, so very, very simple. So the next thing I want to do is delete. I want to be able to delete or remove a to-do. So I'm going to go back into my model.js, and let's put this we'll go right under toggle and say remove. So this is going to be an action. Action, and that takes in same thing, state and the ID, because we need to know which one to remove. And I'm just going to use filter here. I'm going to say state.todos is going to equal state.todos, and we'll filter through. So filter for each to do, and we want to filter out the one that we delete. So we want to say where the ID, where the to-do.id is not equal to the ID that's passed in. Okay, because we're basically returning all of them except the one that we deleted. Now to call that from to-do item, we could actually, I guess we could kind of copy this down, but an easier way to do it, or a cleaner way, would be to just go like this, remove toggle, just put curly braces around that, and then over here we could, let's see, let's actually get rid of this, and we could say remove equal to actions dot remove, and toggle actions dot toggle, and then down here we want to add an on click to this button, and let's call remove and pass in the to-do.id. All right, so let's see if that works. We'll go back. So pick up kids from school, delete, and you can see it fires it off over here. All right. So you can see everything, it's pretty much, it's working the same under the hood as it would with Redux from scratch, but it's a little easier to implement. So let's see, next thing I want to do is add a to-do. So let's go back to model, and we're going to create an add. So let's go right here, say add, and action. So this is going to take in state, and we're going to pass in a to-do here. All right, now when we pass in the to-do, it's going to have a title and completed. If we want to give it an ID, I mean, we could just create like a hard-coded ID, but what I'll do is npm install UUID, which will allow us to just create a random ID. So we'll go ahead and install that, and then we'll bring that in up here. Oops. We'll bring that in up here, import UUID from UUID, and what we'll do is take the to-do that's passed in, we'll add an ID by saying UUID.version4. That will just generate an ID. And then let's see, we're just adding it to the UI here, so we'll take state.todos and we'll set that to an array, and we'll spread across state.todos and then add in our new to-do like that. All right, so now we need to just call that and pass this in from our form. So let's go to add to-do.js, and we're going to be using an action, so we want to use the use action hook. We'll use actions. Okay, and then we're going to go right here. Let's say const add equals use actions, and we want the add action, and then let's just add an on submit. I could create a separate function, but I'm just going to do it from here. So we want to pass in our event and e.prevent default since it's a submit, and let's just construct actually we don't have to do that, we'll just call add, and let's pass in an object with the title, which is equal to the title and the state because that's hooked to the input, and then completed is just going to be false. All right, so we'll save that. Let's try it out. Test add, and there we go. And if we look at our state now, you can see we have our new to-do, and it has a randomly generated ID. So now let's look at using Thunk. So we want to be able to make a request to some API or some backend, and then update our state. So in order to do that, we can just go to our model.js, and from easy peasy, we can bring in Thunk. So I'm going to use, let's see, I want to fetch to-dos from an outside source. So I'm going to use JSON placeholder.typecode.com, which is just a fake REST API with some resources. So we're going to use this to-dos. So we want to use this URL right here. Okay, so I'll just copy that. Now I'm going to clear out these hard-coded to-dos because we want to fill that with the response we get back from JSON placeholder. So let's create a thunk. And it's recommended to keep your thunks and actions separate. You can almost think of these as what you would do in your reducer, and then this is what you would do in like your action functions within Redux. So let's create fetch to-dos, and then we're going to set that to thunk instead of action. And we pass in actions here, but I'm using async await in the fetch API, so I'm going to use async actions right here, and then an arrow. Okay, make sure you put a comma here. So from within here, let's get our response. So I'll do await fetch, and let's pass in that URL, and I'm going to just limit it to 5. So I'm going to add a underscore limit equals 5 here. That will give us that, and then let's do const, and we'll say const data equals await res.json, because we want to get the JSON data. This is how it's done with the fetch API. And then what I'm going to do is call an action. So I'm going to say actions dot and then set to dos and pass in data. Actually, we could call this to dos. Okay, because it's going to return an array of to-dos. So this set to-dos I'm going to create right here. So this is going to be an action, and let's pass in here state and to-dos, which are going to get passed in. And then I'm simply going to set state.todos to those to-dos that are passed in. All right, so let's save that. Now this fetch to-dos obviously needs to be called. If we go back to our application, you can't see anything here. So we want to call that from our to-dos.js. Now we're using functional components here, and we're using hooks. If you're using class-based components, you'd use something like component did mount or lifecycle method. If you're using hooks, you want to use useEffect. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in useEffect. And we also want to bring in use actions, since we're going to be calling that fetch to dos. Okay, so let's go down here and let's say const fetch to dos and set that to use actions. And we want to get actions dot fetch to dos. Now we want to call this within useEffect. So right here, let's say useEffect. This takes in an arrow, and then we want to call fetch to dos like that. Now the way that fetch to dos, the way useEffect works is it runs every time our state gets updated or our component gets updated. And this is going to keep updating, and it's basically going to cause a never-ending loop. So in order to stop that, and if you want it to basically mimic component did mount, you just pass in some brackets here. Now it's going to whine about us. It's going to want us to put in fetch to dos as a dependency. But if we do that, again, it's going to run every single time and cause a loop. So to get rid of that warning, you just want to do ESLint, disable dash next line. All right, so Yeah, I believe that should work. So let's save that. Let's go back to our application, and there we go. So now we're fetching these from the API, and you can see over here in the Redux Dev Tools it says thunk.fetchToDo, and not only that, it tells you that it was completed. Okay, so it tells you that asynchronous request was completed. So I think that's pretty much it, guys. I wanted to show you how to just set up your store, how to create state and access it from any component, and you do that using hooks, how to create actions and access them from components, and how to use Thunk so that you can make asynchronous requests and so on. And if you want to change up the add action to actually make a post request to JSON placeholder, you can go ahead and do that. But I just wanted to kind of introduce this to you. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't use it. It's just another option. The way I see it is you have some pros and cons. The pros is obviously the amount of code. I mean, if we think about this with pure Redux, we would have to implement the store file. We would have to implement the dev tools. We'd have to create action files, reducer files, a root reducer. We'd have to, for each component, map state to props, bring in connect. And we don't have to do any of that stuff with this. However, it is another library that we have to depend on. So that's the big downside. Of course, the more libraries you use, the more chances for bugs, the more chances that things go out of date or deprecated, or the library just gets tossed out. And, that's the stuff you have to worry about. So it's up to you. You get to kind of weigh the pros and cons. But that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I will have this code in a link in the description. If you like this, please leave a like, and I'll see you next time.